Hi everybody, happy Christmas Eve to you! And you might think this is a bit of a strange video topic today when we are talking about what to do when somebody tells you their horror birth story. So you might be wondering, Sophia, that's not very festive. And actually that's okay, because it doesn't matter what time of the year it is, listening to somebody else's horror birth story probably isn't what you want to do when you're pregnant. So I've got a little furry friend with me today. This is Goldie. Say hello. Goldie is unlikely to say hello, but she's very cute, and I thought I'd bring her on anyway for a tiny little bit of extra festive cheer. Meow. So, what do you do when somebody tells you their horror birth story? So first of all, there's only been one person ever has said to me, I wish I'd heard some more birth stories that were a bit scary or put me on edge, because she expected to go in and for everything to be a complete breeze and for her baby just to magically appear, and that wasn't her experience. But it's also really important to say that that lady didn't do any birth preparation either. She didn't know what to expect. She wasn't up to speed with all of her different options and what might happen, and so she was panicked and she was apprehensive. So what do we do when somebody tells us our horror birth story? Well, somebody's horror birth story might not be your horror birth story. So the first thing to remember is, I'm being attacked here, that these things are very subjective. So one person's, oh, this happened and it was terrible, and this happened and it was awful, actually might not be that bad for you. It might be something that you do want to have. One person's idea of a horrible birth and a horror birth story is that they had to have a C-section. For somebody else, they are pleased to have a C-section. They have opted for an elective C-section, or they recognise that they need to have a C-section for the welfare of their baby and for them in that moment. And so it's recognising that somebody else's horror birth story might not be yours. But a good question to always ask when somebody says, oh, let me tell you about, is, before you tell me that, is this going to help me? And then pause, give them a chance to actually answer that question, because the chances are they haven't really thought about whether or not it's going to help them. They're just going to process what's going on in their head and to continue to share that. Now, whether or not their birth experience has been recent or decades and decades ago, doesn't really matter, because if they're telling you something that is making you kind of lift your tail feathers, squeeze your sit bones together, tight buttocks anybody when that happens? If they're telling you a story that makes you feel like that, then it's not helping you. It is getting lodged into your mind, into your subconscious mind, and it's just adding to those other fears, anxieties or worries that you already have. So being able to check, first of all, is this going to help me? Like, please think carefully before you tell me the story is a really useful thing. One of my early hypnobirthing trainings I went on, we were talking very much around keeping everything positive, making sure that we didn't talk about anything negative. And I think there is a place for that, but there's also a place for being very real and for helping you to be supported. So there needs to be plenty of truth-telling in whatever antenatal education you're choosing for yourself. But we were talking very much about how it's important we do not talk about negative birth stories. We do not talk about bad experiences. And for the duration of my 3-day training, there was one other person on that training who had had a really, in her words, horrific, traumatic birth experience. And despite the fact we were talking about how this wasn't something we were going to talk about with our mums-to-be when we got together, this person went around and told everybody again and again and again and again and again and again about her horrible, horrible experience. So I was actively moving from group to group to try not to keep listening to this experience, and still she was moving around and the story was being shared over and over. And it became really apparent that there was plenty of space for her and a need for her to process what had happened. And she was very, very passionate about paving the way and changing the birth stories for people going forward. And that's fantastic. But she was also re-traumatizing herself by going over and over again. So what I would say to you, if you have already had a birth experience that you consider traumatic, and even if you're not pregnant right now, even if you're not having another baby, then there is help and support available out there for you to help you to process that. And if it's a recent birth experience, you can go back to the hospital and ask for a birth reflection session so that you can cover what happened, why it happened, and start to process and put these pieces together again. But in general, if you are pregnant and someone is coming to you with their horror birth stories, ask them, is this going to help me? Is this relevant? Is this useful? So a few things that I've noted down here for you today. Remember that everybody has a negative bias. Even the most positive person in the world isn't going to walk out into a big flow of traffic and go, oh, it's not going to hit me, I feel amazing. They're not. They're just not. So we have a negative bias that is inbuilt within us, and that's what keeps us alive. That's what keeps us safe. It's why when a big disaster happens that we run in the opposite direction. Unless you're in the emergency services, you don't run straight in there. It's why when you see a wild animal or a scary dog, you go in the opposite direction. You don't go straight towards it. You have a negative bias, and that's there to protect you. So it's natural that people who have had a negative story will talk about it, and it's natural that you might want to listen to it to start with. But recognise, is this helping you? Is this fueling your fear and your worry, or is this supporting you to have a more positive experience? Now, anything that makes us feel fearful or anxious or builds on those worries creates tension within the body. And when you have that tension within the body, it's what we call the fear, tension, pain cycle, or FTP for short. When you start to feel more uptight within your body, your muscles start to tighten, to contract. You're sending less oxygen, less of a blood supply. You start to get a dry mouth. You might start to feel a little bit unwell. You can, when I say unwell, that kind of queasy feeling like butterflies in your tummy when you're really nervous. All of your blood goes to the vital parts of your body, ready for you to run away. And actually where you need your blood supply to be going is to your uterus, so that your uterus can do its job as a muscle to provide the effective surges, the contractions that you need for your baby to be born. And so if when you're in labour you're starting to think, oh, I remember this story, and that starts to make you nervous, it's the worst thing you can do for yourself. So find more and more people that can talk to you about relaxed and positive birth stories, not so that you can pretend there's no gore out there. It's going to be messy. Chances are it will be messy, but recognise that there are plenty of good stories out there ready for you to come and tap into. Now, also, feel free to positively excuse yourself from any conversation that is not supporting you right now. Like absolutely any conversation that is not supporting you. Feel free to say, if you just excuse me, or I really would prefer not to hear that right now. Could you tell me that story afterwards? Now, in any of the antenatal classes that I teach or in prenatal yoga, and make it very clear that people have the option as to what they're listening to and what they're not listening to. And it's really important that you exercise that, and that as each individual mum within the group, or mum-to-be, recognises that what they're saying does have an impact on other people. And so if they want to start talking about something, or we're talking about a water birth, and somebody goes, oh, I don't want to talk about a water birth, I can't talk about a water birth, then as a teacher, I will often say to them, come and talk to me about that in the break, or let's have a chat about that in between. And it's up to the individual mums if they want to go and say, oh, please don't tell me about the water birth, or what was it about the water birth. And I know that specific mum, when I spoke to her about the water birth, it was a very, very unique example, and there was actually no direct link to the water birth itself. And so sometimes we really just need to unpick the stories that we're being told to recognise where the issues and where the problems were, so that you can identify as well, if you want to go into that story, that doesn't have to be your experience. Now, everything is so subjective. Have you ever stubbed your toe? Sure you have. And when you stub your toe, what do? Are you hop round the room, all the swear words coming out? Or are you just just squeeze the toe tight, it'll pass. I'm definitely a squeeze the toe with minimal drama. Breathe in and breathe out. But that's probably because I teach hypnobirthing and prenatal yoga and regular yoga. And so I know that when I can send more oxygen back into the body parts, when I can distract my brain away from the throbbing toe, and if I squeeze it, I'm putting a bit of pressure onto the toe. That also really helps to make a big difference. I'm then drawn to the pressure on my toe and not on the feeling. But the point in explaining what happens when you stub your toe is, I'm sure you've been with somebody else who has stubbed their toe, and you would think that the whole world was falling down. They have some massive big issue about what happens when they stub their toe, and it's so painful, I can't believe it, and they'll still be talking about it hours later. And so if you were to say, well, that's not my experience of stubbing my toe, I stubbed my toe is stubbed, it's over, that's fine. But somebody else's experience might be really dramatic and flamboyant and a big deal, and they'll still be talking about it a day later, and they'll still be checking their toe, and is their toenail split, and is it going to come off, and will it go black, and did it chip their nail polish? all of these different things. And so recognize that things are completely subjective. One person's horrific might actually not have been horrific at all. And so when you're hearing horror birth stories, or you're hearing things that you don't want to hear, recognize that they don't have to be that significant for you. Take into the context everything else about that person. Where did they have their baby? Who was with them when they had their baby? How much birth preparation did they do? And I don't just mean the physical preparation in terms of movement, feeling like medicine for your body and being able to move and stretch and understand how your body works. Did they have an active labour? An active labour can create up to 30% more space for your baby to move around in your pelvis. Isn't that amazing? And so being able to move around, really important. Who was the team that they had supporting them on the day? How did they prepare their minds? How did they learn and educate so that they really understood what was happening when they gave birth? All of these things paint a really important picture as to what happened. If that one person had had their baby on a different day, or had a different midwife, a different consultant, if they had done more yoga or more exercise, whatever their chosen mode was of understanding, if they had done different antenatal education, if they had actually practiced their techniques in between, all of these things make a massive, massive difference to the kind of birth experience that you have. So recognizing that is really, really important. So what are my 3 kind of top tips, I suppose, for what to do when you hear a horror birth story? I would say, number 1, remember their experience is personal. It does not have to be your experience. Number 2, you can prepare for a positive birth, for a better birth experience, for an easier, more comfortable, shorter labour. How you do that is up to you. It might be through hypnobirthing, it might be through prenatal yoga, or a combination of both. It might be reading lots of books. You can also go to, there's a really good website called tellmeagoodbirthstory.com. I'll pop that link down below for you as well. Tellmeagoodbirthstory.com. And in there you will find people explaining what their experience was and how that worked. And it's not just going to be that, oh, it was beautiful, it was amazing, it was euphoric, it was orgasmic, it was this, that, or the other. It's going to be their account of what happened. So whether that's been an induction, a C-section, a planned C-section, an emergency C-section, forceps, ventouse, any of these different things, then you can start to understand that you can turn any birth experience that isn't exactly what you were hoping for still into a good birth experience. And that isn't about just going, oh, let's pretend silver lining, everything's rosy. It's not at all. It's recognizing that when you can stay composed on the inside, when you can come back to your calm and relaxed place on the inside, that is what's going to make a really big difference to how you feel, because your body can work more effectively. Your blah, 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 blah mind gets out of the way, and that helps everything to work more effectively, and hopefully will help you to have a smoother, more comfortable labour, and you'll be holding your baby in your arms without all of the other trauma that is potentially there. And also, at a mind level, what's really useful, in the hypnobirthing that I teach, we use what we call a cloak of protection. And this simply means in your mind, you imagine putting something on and letting all of those kind of negative comments just bounce off you. Now you can do this in whatever way feels appropriate for you. Some of my clients aren't that keen on wearing a cloak, particularly if it's summer. They think of a cloak as a big heavy thing, but when it's winter, it can be quite nice to imagine your cloak as a big heavy thing. But imagining that you're putting something on, and within this cloak you feel powerful on the inside, you feel strong on the inside, and everything else just bounces off you. So anything that's not useful, that's not positive for you, that doesn't make you look forward and be excited to meet your baby, then let it fall away. You can also imagine yourself encased within an egg. People like to do this in like a big golden egg, or some kind of palatial carriage, whatever feels good for you. Just imagine yourself in there. And if it's a very much off the cuff comment that you weren't expecting, see yourself as Teflon. Just let it disappear. Just let it wash off you, water off a duck's back, whatever the phrase is that you want to use. See it going away and see all of the positive stuff coming towards you. Now, I've also interviewed lots of my mums who have given birth through either my prenatal yoga classes or through my hypnobirthing classes. and they talk about very candidly about their birth experience, the good and the bad. For some people who felt like they failed, like did hypnobirthing not work for them, and so they're talking very openly about their experiences and also what they needed to do to process afterwards if their birth experience wasn't exactly what they were hoping for. And you can find that across on my website, sophiahansen.com, and just click onto the podcast and you'll see all of the different titles there, and I'll link that down below for you as well. So either way, the reason I originally was talking about this on Christmas Eve, even though it's not particularly festive, two things. I was born on Christmas Day, happy birthday to me, and not very far away. And also, usually at Christmas, this was before lockdown was announced all over again, usually around Christmas, you're seeing lots more people who have a glass or two of wine when you're not having a glass of wine, and then they start to tell you their stories. And so that was why I was sharing it with you right now. But overall, just remember that you have the power to either take on what people are telling you, to believe that that's going to be true for you, or to recognise that's their experience. It doesn't have to be mine. I'm going to let that wash off me. I'm going to ask, is this beneficial for me or not? Do I need to hear it? Can I hear it later? And you can decide to educate yourself, to learn, to develop, to prepare physically, mentally and emotionally for one of the biggest and potentially most exciting days of your life. So whatever you're up to tomorrow being at Christmas Day, then have an amazing day. Just remember that you are surrounded by people or person, or hopefully at least one person and maybe a furry friend who loves you, and you're doing an amazing job. Being pregnant at Christmas isn't always easy, but it can be fantastic. So wishing you all lots and lots of love. Have a Merry Christmas, and I will see you all soon. Bye bye for now.